A few weeks ago, we celebrated something called Easter. Easter was a Roman holiday celebrating the goddess Easter, who was goddess of fertility, one of those kinds of things. And fertility had to do with eggs and rabbits and things like that. But after the Council of Nicaea, Roman holidays and Christian holidays were kind of merged together so that everybody could kind of have a semblance of unity, so to speak. And so Easter, the worship of the goddess Easter, was kind of merged in with the Christian belief in the resurrection of Jesus to kind of take place at about the same time in the spring. So that's why we call it Easter today. Easter doesn't mean the resurrection. It's a totally different kind of a pagan holiday. But we celebrate this time, at this time, the resurrection of Jesus Christ and his atonement. Now, much of the atonement, Jesus' trial, the torture, the crucifixion, was done in public and was witnessed by many people. But his suffering in the Garden of Gethsemane was done in private, where he was alone. We can read from the Gospel of Luke in chapter 22, verses 39 through 45, 7 short verses that describe this episode. And he came out and went as he was wont to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples also followed him. And when he was at the place, he said unto them, Pray that ye enter not into temptation. And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's cast, and kneeled down and prayed, saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose up from prayer, and was come to his disciples, he found them sleeping for sorrow. 7 short verses, 128 words. We have heard these words many times in our lives, and many of us could repeat some of these lines by heart without even thinking about it. But somehow these words don't seem weighty enough to describe what happened here. The words sound too distant to grasp the weight of the situation, as though they were composed from a stone's throw away and spied from afar by sleepy eyes. I am reminded of the words of that great spiritual, Were you there when they crucified my Lord? And so I ask, were you there when he knelt in the Garden of Gethsemane? Certainly not in the flesh, but what about in the spirit? Were you there? Could you have been kept away from this seminal event in the history of our world? What possibly could cause every knee to bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is the Christ, except that we all must be witnesses to this suffering? Somehow I believe that we were there, side by side, witnesses to his suffering, acknowledging that he suffered enough. Enough. Enough to compensate each of us for the pain we have suffered at the hands of others. Enough to carry the burden of our shame and our guilt when we come to the realization that we have injured others. Enough for us to forgive and to be forgiven. Enough for us to forget. Enough for us to heal. enough to take that very personal pain suffered for me alone and to multiply it not by thousands or millions or even billions or even trillions, because that number, however large, would still be a finite number. He suffered enough for an infinite atonement. It is my prayer that each of us will contemplate that suffering, and that we will each not have that suffering go to waste, but that we will rejoice in that suffering. Not that we want him to suffer, but that we are grateful for the suffering that he voluntarily underwent so that we might not have to suffer those same great pains. Thank you for listening today.